The other element that I would like to come back on is the human capital development. Yes, you put in place the policies, you make sure that who owns the production is actually recognized as such, but at the end of the day, if your ecosystem is not invested in terms of capacity building, then again, you can only go as far without realizing that your work will be failing year after year. And by human capital development, we're looking at the entire chain of the creative industries. The talent is at the center of this ecosystem, but alone it does not make the ecosystem. We need people who go with the creatives on a daily basis. So we're talking about the managers who understand how you can actually read a contract and not just go after your 10% and then don't worry about how the artist is actually going to be taken care of. We need the lawyers who also walk alongside the managers. We need the educators, because you need your talent is perhaps innate, it's in you, but it needs to be groomed, just like any other skill that you have around you. So what kind of conversation do we have to have with people in the education sector so they can actually invest in curriculum that reflects what is needed on the labor market? The other element, which was touched on in the panel that just preceded us, the infrastructure. We need places, and those can be physical or digital, where the work of our creatives can actually be, presented, where it can be enjoyed, but done in a very professional manner. If I take the example of this conference room, for us to be able to have this type of infrastructure, it required a lot of skills, and that's why, again, I'm saying the creative economy is part of so many different lines of work, not just the entertainment, quote unquote. And when it comes to infrastructure, I believe we're also at a crossroad on the continent. How do we build infrastructure that puts forward our cultural assets? And by that, I mean, are we building infrastructure that allows an exhibition to come in, even if it's not a museum, for example? So it can be an office building, but it's built in such a way that as soon as you enter, you know you're in Rwanda, you know you're in Kenya, you know you're in Nigeria, for example. So where is the cultural identity when we build around us?
And I think, Minister, that's a really interesting point that you raised there. It's that we need to be very proud of our cultures, though, because I think what's happened in the past is that people have built spaces, but yet they don't feel like they're ours. So I think, I think what I said earlier about Rwanda being very deliberate is that you're making people feel very proud of their culture as well, and that's part of the policies that you have, right? So I think that's really, really wonderful.
The last element,
sure,
maybe before, and that actually speaks to the room here at the CEO Forum, is the access to finance and investment. We need to have investors who understand the nature of the creative industries, and we need creatives who understand the nature of the financial sector. So between them, we talk about financial literacy, but we also need the creative literacy so that they can come and face to face and understand how to finance each other and how you can actually build. And now speaking to people who actually look for scalable enterprises to invest in, we need to reframe how we do our policy so that we can start de-risking the creative industries. We need to put in place policies that explains very clearly how IP is going to be protected, how we can monetize the work that's being produced and put out there on the digital platforms. And when we don't have that kind of clarity, that's actually what makes most investors run away and go to other, and I'm looking at you right now, make you go and look for something that is a bit more straightforward. So with creativity being something that can be sometimes seen as very emotional and personal, but at the end of the day, it is what carries us through, our lives. It's what makes you connect with somebody who's from another culture. It is something that I'm sure if all of us right now would think about one memory from when we were still children, it will have some kind of cultural component to it, or something of creative, like a song, a film, performance. So that thing that is so personal, how do we create now the pathway to the financial resources? So again, you can create a dignified life
the monetizing part of it.
Exactly. So that element, I believe, is one that the government can step in and help de-risk, and we have been doing that here in Rwanda, working with some of the biggest banks in Rwanda to create financial products that really takes into consideration the reality of the work of the creative industry. So those 4 pillars, I believe, are the main pathways that we should be investing in. And remembering again, and here for all the creatives in the room, visibility does not pay the bills, right? It's equity. So
True.
how do we bring those two together so we can really, honor the people who change our lives every single day? Thank you.
And I think that really leads us, thank you very much. I think that leads us really well into Fareed. I think, the money question. And I know IFC has publicly made the investment case for African creative industries. What does the capital landscape actually look like? I'd love to hear a little bit about that from you. And where is the money flowing? And where is it not flowing? And structurally why? So I think maybe if you could just frame that for us, that would be really helpful.
Sure. Thanks. And I think, I could not agree more with the Honorable Minister, because that's exactly, the problem we're facing when it comes to getting the creative industries, I would say, both business and investment ready. And I think you've heard it from the mouth of Makhtar Diop many times. We're very intentional about supporting the creative industries. Year to date, we've invested about $1 billion across the emerging markets, not in Africa, maybe very soon, but across the emerging market, but including Africa, across several segments, which are media, fashion, sports and entertainment. And what we've seen, particularly in some of those segments, is that the companies, and you started with that, you said, how long does it take for a due diligence for an entrepreneurship or an SME business? And that's the whole problem. What we've seen, the money is not necessarily flowing because these companies that have talent, that have creativity, of course, but that have already revenue flowing, are not investment ready. So what we've engaged in is really looking at the different segments of that creative industry. Some struggle more than others to attract capital. I mean, when you're in media, digital platforms, you tend to have some sort of structured platforms that attract more. But when it comes to fashion, we realize that 90% of the entrepreneurs or SMEs that we've been looking at were not investment ready.
No.
So we decided to really build a fashion champion program in Africa, an SME fashion program that really puts technical assistance, training, but training in the sense of how do you develop audited financials and work on your financials? How do you get more savvy with your finance? How do you get the right governance that would send the right message to the investors? And so doing that upfront is very important. Then we provide catalytic capital that we can bring in different forms, but it's about early stage investment as well. So early stage could be a form of VC, could be convertible instruments, could be mezzanine. So we're trying to do that on a more recurrent basis. The good news is that we've identified over the last year more than 30 SME fashion champions across 9 countries of Africa that actually have revenues across from a few thousand, $100,000 to more than $3 million.
Wow.
So that's really how we want to build on and take them to investors going forward.
That's amazing. I think that sort of reoccurring argument, right? That African creative industries are too risky. But what you're saying now is that it's moving in the right direction. Maybe not as fast as we would like it to, but it's still moving. Minister, do you want to add anything on to that?
No.
Congratulations.
No, but I think that this is where all the work on policy is critical, and because IP is the second barrier. I say investment ready, but IP rights and copyrights is the second big dilemma that we face when we want to get capital into these companies. So making sure that rights do not sit offshore, but really are captured by the creators here in Africa. And even in the media space or the digital platform space, you would see that a lot of the platforms have to give up their IP in order to get funding. And that's probably what happened.
That's probably what I
So
heard.
we're working on enabling these companies to own their IP as much as possible. Now, that's not easy.
You came a little bit too late for me.
Yes, but we've tried, and not only in Africa, but in a couple of other countries, India, for instance, and in parts of Latin America. But that's the core problem that these companies have. How do I get more control over my IP rather
That's fascinating.
to give it up?
Yeah,
And
I mean, as somebody that's been through that, I think that is so forward-thinking that you're doing that, because it's what so many people in my space.
We learned.
You learn-
You know, we learned by being there, and
Yeah, well, that's really amazing. Tega, I think I want to ask you, walk us through where value actually sits. I think you know, now we've heard from policy, we've heard the financing, but where does the value in the creative economy really sit?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I just want to touch on something briefly there, because I think with creativity, there's a lot of confusion around IP ownership and value creation. And I do think I want to encourage a lot of African creatives to know the importance of value of ownership. I think it's two different things. Sometimes people think control is having 100% of the entire business, but to increase the value of the piece that you eventually have, you need to assess certain expertise. If it's not expertise, then it's finance. And each of these things will come with their own requirements, right? So I feel one thing I want a lot of people to encourage in terms of the early value creation that I don't hear enough of is grants. I think a lot of businesses, knowing that creative requires passion, a lot of them are not at a place where, like you all agree at this table, are not investment ready, but the passion is there. And if they can assess certain level of finance that is not associated with maybe heavy due diligence. Because I faced ours as well. Even me, we went 2 years of due diligence with Kupanda Capital and TPG. So when she was telling her story, I'm like, this is very true. But we as owners of the business, we wanted structure. So we knew that all these diligence questions were just telling us what we didn't know about our business and what our business needs to have to scale from a futuristic standpoint. But I do think that a lot of creators are really lacking that early stage, not high risk finance. Maybe you look at it from a hypothetically speaking, let's say it's a $1 billion. And you say, okay, you know what? Let's put up $10 million for grants. Like, let's put it for grants. Let's have a lot of companies compete for this money. But for them to vest the money from the pool of grants, they have to meet certain things and certain commitments. And what would be smart for many financial institution that is going to be part of something like this would be that they get to assess the business, understand the principal owners of the business, and say, okay, you know what, this person can actually assess maybe debt finance, equity finance, and things of that nature. But I just feel there's a finance gap between the passion and business and investment readiness. Now, I do think that with value to African creativity, I think is the entire ecosystem. You know, when you look at the youth population on the continent, that just shows future business. Today's business, future business as well. But I do think that something that is really, really missing is understanding that not every aspect of the value chain will grow at the same multiple. So sometimes I see it and I see reports, I'm like, we work with this vendor, we don't think they have a very massive high ceiling, and somewhat of government and private sector thinking through what I would call flywheel ecosystem building. And one area I would like to advocate for here is the festivals. I really think like if we study the economics around something like Coachella, for example, that happens in the US, you can just see how many businesses will benefit from an asset being created of that nature. So I would say there are different ways we can look at the value chain, value creation. For me, I want to prioritize publishing. I feel like a lot of the writers or the behind-the-scene players are not really getting their values protected or being appropriately monetized. Another one would be merchandising. I think if you look at the sport industry, for example, as they mentioned earlier, merchandising is very massive. So most of these football teams, if you look at their annual report, they allocate a lot of budget and revenues to merchandising. And if you merchandise very well with our growing diaspora audience, you can keep manufacturing on the continent, make it efficient, create government incentives for people to manufacture some of this merchandise on the continent, create the retail business here, but also create export value for some of those cultural merchandise that are being created at home. Another piece that I feel like we don't touch on enough is going back to the university education infrastructure, where we have a lot of young people that are looking at today's creativity in our continent and want to work in that aspect of the economy, to start educating them at a very early stage. Because some of the challenges you have with talents. Some of the ones that I work with, you build them very passionately, and they get to a point and say, oh, I need a US management. Oh, I need management from the UK. You can't fault them because the creativity is growing globally, and they feel like I need to work with people that understand the next evolution of my talents. But I do believe that if government and the educational sector can start creating some sort of education around the business around creativity and entertainment, that will make sure that management companies can grow their value within the ecosystem.
That's actually really interesting because, I mean, I don't know what you think, Farid, but perhaps the issue is not grants themselves, but whether they're connected to a longer financing journey. Is that something that you think is?
I think what you touched on is very true, because what we realize as well is what's required is that early capital to really grow. So not necessarily equity even. It's something that could be debt, and we do that already today, on small tickets type of capital. But we also do that with banks, like we've done in West Africa now, a certain number of risk-sharing agreement with local banks, because we realize the banks, to your point, are not really educated about what the creative industry needs, what it is. At some point, you can do the financial due diligence that you want. You're going to hit a wall because
Sure.
you're going to come to the conclusion earlier rather than, or later that this is not investable. Well, you should not stop there. You see, what can we do to help this company get to the
get
point
there.
where
Exactly.
it's investable? So that's what we do. And on the risk-sharing facility that we do with banks, we provide basically a guarantee.
So it
to-
is the longer
exactly.
financial journey,
And
right?
to get that capital earlier on. So we provide through blended finance type of solution, or we have others provide. Now, looking forward, there are things also innovative model that IP trust model, for instance. Once we solve the issue of IP and property, you can really monetize your future
Sure.
revenue and benefit from a lot of that is done already in the market. So we hope to bring that also to Africa, and we're not alone. We're working with even partners like Sony Ventures that has been very committed both to the creative industry and to the continent, and we go to market, I would say, together with some partners.
Talking of markets, I'm going to bring in Bidhi now. I think you bring a complicated part of this conversation. You've argued the strong cultural industries build domestic audiences before becoming exports. And I'm really keen to hear your view on that. And also, was Africa too focused on exporting culture before building domestic markets? I'm keen to hear your views on that.
Yeah, I think, okay, so there's many layers to that kind of discussion, but I think it is a good thing that African talent has been exported, has done well internationally, because it's kind of reassured us. We are good, we are talented. Not that we needed it, but
Validated.
we have been validated. But I think, and this is even going back to the sports panel that was before, and all the conversations that have happened in the different panels here, we've discussed about how the African youth population is growing, how big it's going to be as a slice of the global population in a few years. And the creative industries are the ones who have that youth attention. So the creative industries are actually the ones who are going to unlock all that potential.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be the key or the catalyst. Let me say the catalyst, because other things will play a role. But the creative industries are going to be the catalyst that unlocks, whether it's their economic potential, their, I'm losing the words, but just their, what they can imagine for themselves. The creative economies and industries are the ones that are going to unlock that. And to do that successfully, I think we need to take that sports approach of going back to the grassroots
Yeah.
and building up again. We've had very many basketball stars from Africa in the NBA, but as you said, as the previous panel noted, people now tuning in to see BAL and seeing that happening on the
For
continent
sure, yeah.
is a very different thing. And I think it'll have the same kind of effect. We have seen Burna Boy, Wizkid, everyone on those global stages, but what is that Lagos Coachella, or not Lagos, maybe somewhere else in Nigeria. What
Sure.
is that Coachella that everyone goes to on the continent? What is, Ouagadougou is a perfect example of a grassroots built film festival. The whole world goes there, but it never lost its local identity.
Yeah.
Like, it's for the people there.
And it's a
but
brand. It's a brand of its,
it's a
own,
brand
right? It's a
on its
complete
own.
brand.
And like, you can go to Cannes, but you can't diss Ouagadougou when in Cannes.
No.
People in Cannes will tell you don't know what you're talking about, because it has its
Exactly.
own status. So I think that's what I mean when I say we need to go back to building for the grassroots, because that's honestly how we will unlock that huge population we're talking about. That's the only way we can unlock it, in my view.
So Farid, let me bring you back. Mbidi is effectively arguing that ecosystems create capital, not the other way around. Who comes first, the audience or the money?
That's. I think the money. I tend to never put the money first. From everything that I've seen in my years of investing, and I think the substance, the creativity, the creators are the ones who need to show, what their project is, what their vision is, and
They
then
need to tell their story, right?
you need to tell the story. And telling the story, by the way, is important. We take that for granted, but the way you tell that story is what ultimately will be a measure of success.
And does the IFC help them with that? I'm really keen to know. Do you help them with the brand, with how they
Absolutely.
brand themselves?
Absolutely. And we're doing that in the creative industry, but if I look at how we've been working over the years, building up, venture capital, for instance, on the continent, it was something that didn't really exist or was just nascent. And we had to help fund managers, for instance, on VC and PE, building their own capabilities to grow. And we've created for, SME Ventures in private equity that has been running for 15 years, that does exactly that. It helps emerging fund managers, first-time fund managers, structure themselves,
Yeah.
telling the story, setting up an investment committee, setting the governance, portfolio construction. So we're doing the same in the creative industry. I mean, that's the
wonderful.
same process.
That's wonderful. I want to bring Kego into this. You once said that building the brand was easier than building the business, and that stayed with me. Why is that?
So I guess let me start with, just building a brand is easy because all you need to do is capture people's imaginations. I think as we speak about the creative industry, and while we've been here the last 2 days, I've heard a lot about the digital industry and AI, and that kind of feeds our heads, but the creative industry feeds our soul. No one's ever gone on ChatGPT and been moved to tears, but I can show you a movie and it will make you cry. I can play you a song and it will make you want to dance. So building a brand, a creative brand, is pretty easy. You just need to have the work ethic for it. You can create an aesthetic. You put it on Instagram, and all of a sudden people want it, right? You give them something to aspire towards. I think the business portion of building, a brand is the challenging part, because that requires expertise, that requires support, that requires, mentorship. One thing that as we speak about, I think there's a big mismatch between the creative talent that we have in Africa and the people evaluating that talent as financiers. They don't understand the businesses they're entering into. We've spoken with my colleague previously when we were just starting out about trying to get some funding, and he made mention that they'd rather build KFCs because the business they understand, right? It's quantifiable. They know they'll sell 10,000 pieces of chicken in 4 months, and they can kind of put a number on it, but they don't understand what the journey is like in terms of the creative industries and building, in our sense, a fashion brand. I mean, we've been at it for 20 years. We failed, reset, and came back on our own. So if I had gotten funding previously, after that failure, I would have disappeared had we not continued to bootstrap. So I think there needs to be a mindset shift. I think that creatives need to be in on the conversations around financing to help help kind of articulate the story of a brand, of the industry, so that we make it almost digestible for financiers and finance houses and banks, and that will kind of bridge that mismatch gap that we have at the moment.
I think, just from my own experience, people invest where they understand, right? And I think that was what I found, is that the people that were acquiring me just did not understand our market, or how we scaled, or why we were successful. And they really didn't take the time to understand. They just, wanted the raw numbers of scale and how you got there. So perhaps the question for Africa is not whether value exists. The question is whether the world has learned how to recognize it. I think that was that was what I felt there. But I don't know, Farid, do you want to add any more to that, or is that a fair assessment?
No, but I think you're spot on. It's also educating the investment environment about what creative industry is, and what fashion is, that you assess it very differently in terms of the due diligence you do and the risk you see. So it's not about investing blindly.
Sure.
It's
No,
about
it's not.
really understanding what you're investing.
Exactly.
And how you're investing. So
And also something that's not familiar.
Yeah.
I think that's
Sounds
the problem.
risky.
Is that when it's not familiar, I think we can mix it up. It's not
Yeah.
familiar, so we assume it's
Yeah.
risky, and that's what I found in my example. Is that because they weren't assured of the structures that we had within the country, within
Yeah.
the continent. They just deemed it as risky, which is hence my
Yeah.
2.5 years of due diligence.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
But Kego, I want to come back to you. The creative side, and and building the structures that are needed around it. I mean, take us through that. As partnerships sort of multiply, how should African companies try and retain long-term value?
Well, I guess it's all about timing, building the right systems at the right time. For us, if I take you through our journey, we started in a garage with about 900 T-shirts. But the first system we built was around customer experience. So we really wanted to focus on customer centricity and making sure that the customer journey is as easy as possible, not just from a purchasing perspective, but if they want to return. So focus on the things that you can control immediately. Having an identifiable aesthetic on social media. Those are the things that build those early stages of growth. And then the next stage is, getting financial support in place. And I don't mean necessarily funding. I mean someone that does understand, how to put together financial statements, audited financial statements. IP protection was a big thing that we started off with very early on in South Africa, and now we've sort of done that globally, particularly in areas where where the production is happening. So we protected our IP in countries where they are able to reproduce and possibly could replicate, so that we make sure that we're the only ones that own our IP in those areas. So it's a long journey. You fix the easiest problem first, and the problem that you have at that particular moment as you scale. And I think once you fix enough problems, then you'll find that financiers are much more willing to listen, and they will then come knocking on your door, and that's where the value creation comes from.
Great. I think we could keep going on. I think we should maybe go to asking sort of one question. If we were sitting here again 10 years from now, and Africa's creative industries had genuinely reached scale, what is the one thing that would have changed? I wonder whether I can ask you, Minister, to take that. What do you think that would be, the one thing, 10 years' time, if we were to scale?
I think it comes down again to IP ownership, and in that context for the continent, it would have to be the collective management organization. Right now, we do have an issue overall on the continent where, maybe to give a bit of background, what a collective management organization is, it is a structure that is put in place at a public or private level that is in charge of collecting the copyrights on behalf of the artists or the creatives in general. Now, the way it is done internationally is that the CMOs, like we call them, talk to each other, which means that if your music is being played in England, for example, and your IP is registered in Rwanda, the CMO in England will send the fund to Rwanda directly. Right now on the continent, the CMO regulation is still not where it should be. So I believe that 10 years from now, it should be done automatically, where you wouldn't have to go and negotiate for something that actually, and that's the irony, exists in every single country under the IP law. Every country has an IP law, but enforcement is lacking. So in the context of Rwanda, we had to review the model we had for the CMO. We used to have a privately led CMO model. Now we moved on to a publicly led one. And the reason why we are pushing now for this to be, endorsed at national level is because, and I believe that's a point that was made earlier, is that we need to educate people about the importance of IP, and we need to educate people about the fact that if you're going to consume something, you should pay for it.
And that education should be done early, right?
It should be done early, but we shouldn't stop at, okay, if he doesn't get it, then he doesn't have to pay for it. No, it's the law.
It's evolving as well, right?
Yes, so if it can be done almost like a system, it's running on its own. You don't have to literally go and knock at a hotel, for example, and say, hey, this week, or let's say this year, you played this many times such and such person's music, you need to pay for it. Or you've maybe used somebody's film in that context. Did you actually acknowledge the copyright? So again, the importance of the royalties management, the importance of paying back to the creative system what has been consumed. Just like, I like to give the example that if you're in a building and you're using water and electricity, you don't say, well, it should be free for me. No, you are using somebody's creativity that they invested money in, so
like
you should be
it should be
paying
part
for
of the infrastructure, and
It
you need
should
to
be
pay for
part
it.
of Exactly. So 10 years from now, that should be the rule all over the continent. People don't even have to think about it anymore.
Great. Farid, tell us what you think in 10 years from now.
I think if we project ourselves 10 years from now, and I would say what would success look like,
Yes.
is collectively we have done a good job in one, scaling those SMEs, entrepreneurs, creators, to a point where, success is demonstrated, sustainability is demonstrated,
Exactly.
that the finances around have seen it, some have contributed to it, and that we've set the standards of the industry from that standpoint. It correlates with the governments doing a good job on policy, not just incentives, but long-term sustainable policies on IP rights and copyrights that really enable this sector to be protected both on the continent and beyond the continent. So I think this is really what I would like to see happening in 10
And
years.
I'd love to hear from you, Tega. In 10 years' time, what is the one thing?
I would largely say the festivals. I feel like the festival scene, I don't know how many festivals we have today on the continent that truly attracts intra-Africa travel. Like you look at Europe, you look at North America. So I do think that the festival scene, if we get the festival scene right, so many creative businesses on the continent will just boom. And I think also too, because I've spent some time with investors, I do understand the joy of having exit, having return on your money, and that would truly mean that patient capital was truly patient from 10 years from now.
Tega's really into festivals, so I think we have to start looking at festivals more carefully. Bidhi, do you want to give us 10 years' time?
Yeah. I think for me, a dream scenario would be a change in both how the creative arts are made and how they're consumed. Right now I think we make in a toxic environment. And for me, what a more conducive one would be is, taking the same approach people take with manufacturing, where you make policies on a government level that are more protective to domestic creation. So whether it's on film and media, you talk about quota systems, which, people ask, where did South Korea come from? Not knowing they had a film quota system in the 60s, 70s, France as well, that protected their industries from being cannibalized by others. And so just doing that kind of thing to protect the people making, and then ensuring for the consumers that they do have ways to consume.